Good morning. All right. Well, I have 10 o'clock, and I'm a believer in starting on time, as I appreciate you being on time this morning. We may have some more people jump on. Um, well,
Good
welcome.
morning.
Hey, how's it going, Janetta?
Good, good. I'm here to listen in. And I
All
see there's
right,
some
and give
people
us
here.
and
Good.
pass along any words of wisdom. We appreciate it.
Gary, you got it. I don't think you need my wisdom. You're it.
Wanted to say to welcome to Antoinette. I believe she's new with us. So
Mhm.
welcome. I see you're on. Um, all right. So I think we left off on paragraph 11, which was utilities, major systems. So obviously, most of you are dealing with probably public, but there are some well and septic areas. If you get a little bit further out, actually, even in some places like Great Falls and places like that. So never assume. Just make sure that when you talk to your seller, that you ask them. Just kind of confirm that they actually are on public water and sewer. And then the hot water. So this is the one of the things that actually shocks me that people are not aware of. I don't know how many times, I'm sure some of you have come across the same thing, where we go into a house and you're like, all right, is hot water, electric, gas, whatever. And the people seem confused. They're not even sure. So it may require you to go into the basement and to actually take a look at the hot water heater and their systems to just see whether or not it's gas or electric. So make sure you put the right stuff. I've actually run into situations. So we had this situation a number of years ago now where an agent put in um, electric when it was actually gas. We wound up working it out, but here's what you're going to find out, right? As an agent, is that the only reason that people bought this house was because it was gas and not electric. And so that's always the case, or the only reason we bought this house was because of something, right? So please make sure, I think in that case, because remember, there is a difference in the pricing on information. And I'll be honest with you, I'm one of those that prefers gas over electric. So I would make sure, just make sure that you're asking the question, you're putting in the right stuff. In the case where we had a situation where it was incorrectly put, thankfully the buyer was reasonable. They had done a home inspection. The home inspector pointed out that it was electric versus gas, or vice versa. I don't remember the exact situation, but it was something like that. And of course the homeowners were clueless and didn't know, and the agent was going by what they were told. So I wasn't worried about our situation, but it was a pricing issue, right? I think the sellers had to fork over a few $100s or something like that just to kind of say, hey, we're gonna make you all whole, and we're sorry that it's not one thing, it's another. So anyway, same thing with air conditioning systems, making sure that they have a lot of people shockingly, you have dual zone, usually one's in the attic, one's in the basement, whatever. Just check with the people, ask questions, walk around, make sure you're understanding that. Same thing with the heating, gas or electric, and then so the septic. Okay, so one thing I'll say about the septic system is that it's not always accurate in public records. I would check public records though, because again, you may have a situation, and this happens all the time in Virginia, at least I'm aware in our area, right? Northern Virginia, our area, where they buy a house, maybe it's on a septic that's really only perking for 3 bedrooms. They put a bedroom in the basement. Many people shockingly do not go through the actual proper processes and get, permits and everything else that they're supposed to. And a lot of times it's on the contractor. I mean, I think to some degree it is the seller's problem, but I also believe most people are counting on their contractor to say, oh, by the way, I know when we were changing out a gas hot water heater, we had to get a permit, right? And the contractor knew that. And so it's funny because we had a conversation with a contractor one time, and he said, a lot of contractors don't like to do it because the permitting process takes time, right? And time is money for them. So a lot of them will kind of bypass those things. So just be sure that when you're talking to a seller, they may have legitimately paid someone, gotten their basement finished, and it looks beautiful, but now it doesn't actually comply. with what is in the system, right? In terms of what it actually perks for. Most people, especially if you have a builder, they will go with the cheapest, right? The least expensive. And so if I just have to get a system that perks for three, and then you ultimately add two more bedrooms, well, it doesn't perk for that. So when, and I share with that with you because when you're putting that in the system, right? Bright MLS does have that it perks for three, but it's actually a five-bedroom home, right? And so when you put in five bedrooms, as the buying agent or as the buyer, have to read and see that even though there's five bedrooms here, it's not actually made for five bedrooms. I actually had another problem with this one was a long time ago now. This was probably, I don't know, 15 years ago for me, where an agent put in that it perked for five bedrooms, but it only actually perked for four. So they were selling the home as a five-bedroom house. And at this time, this was in McLean, and the difference in a four and a five bedroom home was about 150, $200,000. I mean, you wouldn't think it would be that much, but it really was. When we did, so what had happened was they did the system checks and everything. The agent had put in there that it perked for five bedrooms, and it did not. And of course, now the buyers are thinking, I've overpaid for this home. This wasn't during the crazy we're going 200,000 over and people are waving. This was, kind of in a balanced market that we had at the time. And so the buyers said, look, we're not going to move forward with this, unless you, reduce the price. And I want to say they asked for 250,000, $250,000. And of course, the agent had an egg on her face because she had, again, didn't use the boxes properly. And of course, didn't ask the questions and honestly probably wasn't 100% sure, but also didn't check. There's things that you have to do. Again, checking the public records. If you're unsure and your client's unsure, all of those things. But at the end of the day, so what happened was she actually gave up her commission. She gave up her commission, and then the sellers also had to chip in money. The sellers were upset because they felt like they had told her she put it in, didn't put it in properly in Bright MLS, had advertised it as such. And the difference was, and I don't know if we ultimately settled on 250. It might have been more like 200 or something like that. But she wound up, giving up her commission, and the sellers had to give up some money, and they were none too happy. And I would imagine not going to be on your referral list. So, it's little things like that that usually will bite an agent. So please be careful. I mean, don't, and I know it's hard because when we get into a listing presentation and then you go through the listing paperwork, which we'll cover at some point. We're asking a lot of very personal questions. How much do you owe? Give us all your information, So sometimes we're uncomfortable with that, but you have to make sure that you're comfortable talking about those things. So anyway, that was a lot about the septic, but it's a big deal, and especially when you don't deal with septic very often, because most of us don't, right? And then all of a sudden you get that $1 million home that you're like, oh my God, I got this house and it's in, Fairfax Station and they're on septic. And I'm like, I have no idea. If you're unsure, please ask one of us or ask a colleague who's dealt with that before. There are very few septic waivers out there, but if they have one, they're going to have some paperwork or something from the state that says that there's some sort of waiver. What I found in talking to other brokers that do a lot more business out, is that a lot of times those waivers do not transfer. So anyway, and just keep that in the back of your mind. If someone has a waiver, as a buyer agent, if they have a waiver, doesn't mean that you will be able to waive whatever they've waived in terms of septic requirements and such. So anyway, but notice it does say on there though, State Board of Health septic system waivers are not transferable. So that's going to have to be something that you keep in mind whenever your purchaser is buying a home. That does have a waiver. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on that because you're probably not going to deal with that a lot. But if you do get in a situation like that, please make sure you ask questions before you move forward so that you know what you're getting into and your people are getting into. Personal property and fixtures. Property includes the following personal property and fixtures if existing. So here's what I'm going to tell you. Please don't write in anything that's already covered in the paragraph here in the contract. it's already in there, so there's no need. And my thought, and I think most folks, whenever you start writing stuff in, that becomes a negotiable item, right? It means, oh, well, it's up for grabs. Maybe, maybe not, because what I do see people writing in from time to time will be shades, right? And when you look in here, it says built-in heating and central air conditioning equipment, plumbing and lighting fixtures. Lighting fixtures are important because I think for those who were at, Ryan Stewart's last week, he talked about the chandelier, right? It's the one that's gone through the family for generations. And when a buyer sees it in pictures, and when a buyer goes to the house and sees it, they're going to think it conveys. So if you have someone who has a chandelier that is worth a lot or they want to keep it, you might think it's the ugliest thing in the world. If they still want it, please tell them, let's take it down, right? The refrigerator, that is the, top of the line deluxe refrigerator that they want to take and they want to replace it when they leave. Replace it now. Don't let it be in the house when someone walks through because they're going to want it. So it says anything that's existing. So existing means what my eyes see it as I'm walking through. That's existing, right? Um, Plumbing, lighting fixtures, indoor and outdoor sprinkler systems, bathroom mirrors. They had to add that one in because people were because some of those technically can come off the wall. I think Ryan had talked about one where, it was this framed mirror and it looked beautiful and all of that. And it technically could be considered a picture, right? I mean, because it's hanging on the wall, it's not really attached to the house like your picture frames up and down the staircase. So just be mindful of those things. Go through and ask your people, look, is there anything in this house that because keep in mind, like Ryan was saying, a lot of other places they take their washer and dryer, they take their refrigerator. I mean, I know down in Louisiana, Alabama, I'm from Louisiana, down in the South, when you leave, you're bringing your appliances with you. It's weird. I find it weird. You all, but that's so if someone's coming from a different part of the country, that may be normal to them. So you have to make sure that they understand if they're selling or buying, what are they getting, right? I see something in the chat. I'll get to it in a minute. Bathroom mirrors, sump pump, attic and exhaust fans, storm windows, storm doors, screens existing. It doesn't mean if there's supposed to be screens and some are missing. It's what is existing at the time, right? Install wall-to-wall carpeting, window shades and blinds, window treatment hardware, so not curtains, right? Smoke and heat detectors, antennas, exterior trees and shrubs, which seems, I guess Ryan was saying he's seen that where people have taken trees. Maybe I planted a peach tree and it's not fully grown and I want to take it. Take all that out. Make sure you ask them ahead of time on your listing presentation. Is there anything in this house that's hanging and attached to the house that you want to take? And make sure you ask those questions ahead of time. Says 90% forced air, but this is not an option here on the listing agreement. Forced air in the listing agreement. No, I think the listing agreement just asks whether or not it's, gas or electric. Um, so I wouldn't worry about that. I don't know specifically what your question is there. Um, so if you want to clarify or unmute or whatever, let me know. But yeah, on a listing
Yeah,
agreement, it's not. Oh, go
my,
ahead.
my question is oftentimes on a listing, people will put, when they put the option for what type of heating and cooling, there is an option in the MLS for 90% forced air. And I see a lot of times that's on the listing. So when people ask me, we're buying a house, I'll read off that that's what the listing says, but on the listing agreement, that's not in there. And I was just asking that because you were saying don't add anything to what's on there. So I wasn't sure exactly what is the disconnect.
Gotcha. That's a great question. Yeah, I don't see anything about forced air on here, obviously. So, I would, is that something that you use? I mean, I don't, I'd almost, I don't want to say this, I'd almost question whether or not the agents have any idea, what they're putting in there. Yeah, I mean, I think most people think forced air are like the little vent systems. It's not the ones along the wall. It's not a window unit. It's one that's pumped from the basement or maybe from the attic or whatever. Um, I haven't seen any problems with that. I haven't seen any issues with that. So I'd have to look into that further to get some clarity as to why it's not on the listing agreement.
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't know
Or
why it's not on there, but then again, I see it on the listing. So I was just wondering, am I missing something? But that's okay.
not that I'm aware of, but
Um,
but I could certainly look into that further. Let's see.
this is Janetta.
Yeah,
I know that forced air coincides with gas heat, and heat pump coincides obviously with electric heat. So maybe if the seller says, I have a gas heat, it's assumed that it comes with forced air because it has to warm up and force out into the rooms.
that sounds like a great explanation to me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Can't you make a list of things that do not convey? You can, but here's the deal. For those, if you've done this long enough, you understand that whether you write it in here, right, meaning in the listing, right, in MLS, big bold letters, you put around your house does not convey. Big old things that say do not convey. I promise you, someone will write it in the contract anyway. So my thought is, yes, you certainly can put in a list of things that do not convey. Um, but here's what I've also found. A couple of things can happen, right? And we'll go through some of those scenarios here in a second. Is number one, the agents don't read. We know that, right? Agents don't read and they're going to put it in anyway. They've seen 25 houses with these people and they're like, "Oh, I don't know what." Even though you put the sheet, you use the NVAR sheet with all the stuff and you put in the seller's FERPTA and a not FERPTA and what all, you put all of that in and agents don't read it and they send you a contract anyway, or an offer. And they put in all these things that do and do not convey. And then there you are, like whiting out everything. So the challenge is when you walk through a home, right, and you see it, we know the furniture doesn't convey, but like all of the other, the beautiful mirrors, the nice chandelier, and all of that, which complement the home, it just naturally a buyer is going to get attached to that, and that's what they're going to remember. They're not going to remember. So, yes, you can put a list of things that do not convey, but I'm just here to tell you it's going to be more trouble for you in the long run. Trouble. It's just going to be more hassle in the long run because inevitably a buyer's going to be like, yeah, but we really want that, right? And even though we all know they're not giving you more money because it has that beautiful chandelier, they're going to act like they are. Well, that's why we gave you that price, was because you had that beautiful chandelier. So I would just be careful on doing that and doing whatever you can to remove things and just get them out of sight, out of mind, right? I mean, and here's what I tell the seller. Look, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I think these are all beautiful. I love them. I think these are great. But if you want to take them, you're gonna have to pack anyway. And we're talking about putting things in storage or selling things or whatever it is they're going to be doing. Why don't we just remove that? And then the buyer doesn't ever see it and there's never a problem. It just I'm not, again, it may not be any issues for you, but I'll share a couple of stories here in a second of things and it becomes a problem, right? So smart home devices installed, hardwired or attached to personal property or fixtures conveyed pursuant to this paragraph, including but not limited to smart switches, thermostats like Nest, right? Your doorbells. Everybody's got it seems like I have a Ring doorbell. Security cameras do convey. Electrical vehicle charging stations do convey. A lot more people have added that to their house. Solar panels on the property do convey. There's an attached addendum. That's a whole mess there. All surface or wall-mounted electronic components and devices do not convey. Okay, so I think for those who weren't at Ryan's thing, so the TV, right, is a wall-mounted electronic device that does not convey, but the mounts convey, right? However, all related mounts and brackets and hardware do convey. Now, here's what it doesn't say. It doesn't say if your seller takes the wall mounts or if the buyer asks for them to be removed, it doesn't say that there's patching or painting that has to happen. So be very specific. If you go into a home and the buyer says, maybe they're using a room that a buyer's going to use as a sitting room, but they don't want a TV. They don't believe in televisions, right? But you have like 5 TVs in there, and you have your speaker system, and it's the man cave in the basement, whatever it is. And the buyer says, well, we don't want that. Okay. Well, we'll write in there that you don't want the TV, or, obviously the TV doesn't convey, but the wall mounted equipment, because it says right here that they do convey, but maybe your people don't want it. So if your people don't want it and they want it fixed, because remember, that's as of the date of home inspection or walkthrough or whatever you put on your contract, it had the wall mounts on there with the holes, right? So if you don't want that and they want it patched and painted, you have to be very specific to say, we don't want the wall mounts for the 5 TVs in the house, and we want all of them to be patched and painted. That has to be written in the contract. Otherwise, it's not something that the seller is obligated to do. So make sure you are aware of that. I saw a question. Let's see. Oh, there you go. See, Janetta, her words of wisdom. That's why she's on here. We appreciate it.
Good.
All right. Items marked as yes are currently installed or offered or will convey. Now, I do love that they changed it from the yes or no thing and just put yes on all of these. An alarm system, built-in microwave, goes through all of the things here. Now, very, very important. And I know it seems like this is the silliest part. Gary's spending a lot of time on this. It's because this is where I see a lot of the problems, right? What conveys, what doesn't convey, what your buyer's expectations are, what the seller's expectations are. So I had a situation where an agent wrote in, um, the listing agreement said no washer and dryer, right? The contract, however, oh, and MLS, no washer and dryer. And as I mentioned, either you don't read, or they're trying to, I don't want to say pull a fast one, but they're writing an offer, right? And so the buyer agent says, gee, they say that it doesn't convey. And either they didn't read and put that it did convey, or they said, well, we're going to try it anyway, right? And they put forward that the washer and dryer did convey. This is where you, as a listing agent, have to read the contract and have to make sure everything matches, right? So what did they do? The agent was, I don't remember if it was a multiple offer situation or not, but a lot of times, or maybe you're, at a wedding, you're all, you all know you're at the Nats game, you're somewhere, you're at a concert, and then all of a sudden, of course, that's the time that someone wants to ratify something, and you're on your phone and you're like, oh yeah, that looks right, that looks good, or I've got 17 offers in front of me and I'm just going through and I'm like, yep, everything looks great. And then all of a sudden they ratify something that says the washer and dryer did convey. Well, guess what? When the all of a sudden, and it didn't even come up until when? Until walkthrough. Why? Well, because those sellers had moved all their stuff out, including the washer and dryer. Buyers go over there and they're like, wait, or the buyer agent, where's the washer and dryer? Like, well, it didn't convey, but we said it in the listing, it said it in the MLS. And the agent's like, yeah, but the contract said that it does convey. And the agent's like, oh my gosh, egg on my face, calls me up, calls Janetta, whoever, right? Can't help you. The contract says that they did, and guess what? The agent was out $1,500 because they don't want the cheap washer and dryers. And they're not cheap anymore. They wanted the nice ones. They wanted the front loading, whatever was in there, right? The like kind. But at that point, you're not going to give your client a cheapo washer and dryer because they're upset, so and you want a good relationship with the buyer agent as well. So they wound up buying a washer and dryer, because obviously the buyers were upset that it was gone. It was supposed to be in there. And it's like kind, right? So if most people, their own washers and dryers aren't the cheapo ones, they're usually the nice ones, right? And especially if someone's moving and going to take it with them, it usually means that it was brand new or close to brand new, and they didn't want to leave it because they just spent a lot of money on it. So, so it's very important that you read. The remotes. Oh my gosh, remotes for the garage. You put two and there's only one. Oh, and now those are cheap enough that you can buy a universal one. But it's little things like that that will cost you out of pocket that you don't want to have to worry about. So make sure you have everything. And then right here it says other conveyances, right? So if there is something that you do not want to convey, or this is where you can write in as a buyer agent. We don't want the wall mounts, right? And then that's where I'm going to put in and purchaser requests seller or ask seller or demands, however you want to put that, that the seller patch and paint all holes where there are pictures or where there are whatever, those types of things that they want. Um, if you want something taken off. So just make sure you're very specific. Remember, when you are doing this, it's what's in the contract that Jeanetta's going to look at, that if it goes to court, an attorney, judge, that they're going to look at a board. If you go in front of the, NVAR or DPOR, they're going to look at what's in the contract. So if it doesn't matter what you wrote up, right? It doesn't matter that you put conveyed or didn't convey in the MLS listing. If you ratified something and it did convey, then that's what the expectation is going to be. All right. Fuel tanks. Thankfully, we don't deal with a lot of these. Fuel tanks, the least. And then, however many you have or it's owned, and then however many there are. Unless otherwise agreed to in writing, and this is important, any heating or cooling fuels remaining in the supply tank at settlement will become property of the buyer. Now, I just throw these stories out. You do this long enough, you come across a lot of crazy stuff, right? So we had this situation. This was in Fairfax Station. The people had just spent $550 to fuel up the tank, and it was, I guess it was toward the end of winter, so it was still cool but not cold. And but they had refueled, and then they had to sell. And so the sellers didn't, the sellers, well, part of it was negotiation, right? They didn't get quite the price they wanted, and there were some home inspection items. And so when it came to the fuel tank, it says whatever's left in the tank will become property of the buyer. So of course, the seller's like, well, look, ask the buyers, do they want the fuel in the tank? And the buyer's like, yeah, it says right here, whatever's left. That seller spent $500 to remove the fuel. They spent $550 to put it in and $500 to take it out. That's how vindictive people can be. So I know that sounds crazy, but it like literally people do that. So please make sure. And guess what? Didn't say a thing. And I'm sure in the fall, when the people were like, hey, we're ready to turn on the system and have it all checked out, and they see that they had none left because and there's nothing illegal about it because it says it's what's left, right? It's what's left at settlement. And so the sellers made sure at settlement there was no fuel left in that tank. So I know many of you probably don't even deal with that. And I don't share it with you because you're going to have a fuel tank issue. I share that with you because you don't know what people are going to do. And when you read the contract and so the point is you want to be the smart one, the smart agent who knows the contract, because they had no complaint. Of course, we never heard from them again because what can you say? At settlement, there was nothing left of the tank, right? So you just never know. They had, and part of the story was they had asked the buyers to pay them $500 for, they didn't ask for the full 550 because I guess it had been a month or so. And so they're like, well, we'll just take $500. And the people refused. So they paid $500 to get it removed. So you just never know. All right. Any leased items, systems or service contracts, including but not limited to fuel tanks, water treatment systems, long contracts, security system monitoring, and satellite contracts do not convey absent an express written agreement by buyer and the seller. The following is and usually these are probably more. I don't know that we see a whole lot of satellite contracts anymore. I think even DirecTV has moved to streaming. So it's probably the lawn contract, security system monitoring. Remember, those don't automatically convey. And a lot of times, this is a good time to then talk to the other agent. Hey, do they have monitoring on the home? And see if maybe they can get them a deal. Maybe if you could just get it to switch from the seller to the buyer, you could save your people money instead of like starting up a contract and there's all those other things. So talk to the agent and see if there's anything you could do to try to get your people maybe a better deal if they want to continue a lawn service or security system or anything like that. All right, let's see. I saw I had a couple of things in the chat here. Yeah, so when one little thing upsets the party, they'll take it out. Oh, absolutely. Over the course of the transit. And and it's all about, remember, this is so emotional, right? We're moving, you got the kids and we're stressing and where do we go? And we found something, but that's not working on that end. Or, especially think about this, especially the seller who gets everything they want, right? And then they go to buy on the other end and they get nothing they want because that's, as a seller, you're all happy, right? Cakes and flowers and everything else. But as a buyer, remember, you don't have that leverage, right? So then, so if your buyer then demands all of these things, but you as the buyer on the other side can't get anything because it's a seller's market and you feel wronged, or maybe you did the old, it's not contingent on a home inspection, but you asked for stuff anyway. We've seen that, right? For void only or whatever. Yeah, there's lots of things that upset people. Here's what I found though, and here's what I'm asking of you. You keep a level head because I've found more often than not, it's the agents, right? If I go to my sellers and I say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, look, it's communication. They're saying home inspection for informational purposes only, right? Void only or whatever. But I'm just going to let you know there is a chance they still may ask for something. So don't be surprised, right? That's a better approach than, oh my gosh, Mr. and Mrs. Zeller, can you believe it? They said void only, and now they're coming at us with 5 items they want done, or they'll get out of this contract. Oh my goodness. And so the agents wind up making things bad, right? And because I've dealt with agents before, where they were like, "Oh, my people are so upset and whatever," and then when you get to the settlement table, they're the nicest people. They are the nicest people, and there is a way. I think sometimes we have this mentality, I want to win. The agent have to win. I have to get something. It's like, no, my job is to get these parties together and to get the settlement. So how can we do that? And I know some people are a challenge to work with. We all get those on the other side. They don't answer your phone calls, they're rude, whatever the case may be. You got to hold it together though, and give your buyers and sellers the communication and reassurance that it's all going to be okay. We're going to get there. I've dealt with this before, or if you haven't, we've dealt with this before, right? Meaning a company. You've heard some stories here. I've got plenty more. I know Janetta does, and hope you all do. So talk to your fellow agents. I'm not sure what to do. What do I do here? We're going to all make it through because at the end of the day, if it all blows up, nobody's happy. You don't get paid. This isn't a good thing. So try to hold it together, be that voice of reason, even when the other agent may not be, because sometimes it's not the seller, sometimes it's the agent that makes things more challenging and difficult to work with. Um, can't you simply add a debit on the CD from the buyer for the remaining fuel left in the tank? Yeah, if both parties agree, that's what you want to do, right? So in this case, the buyer said no, the contract reads that it's whatever's left at settlement. Well, why would we pay you? Their thought process was there's no way these people are going to take out the fuel. We don't have to pay you because the contract says we own it, whatever's left. So yes, that's what the seller was trying to do, was to convince the buyer to go ahead and pay them. And we would have figured that out, whether it was a debit or they could have written a check, whatever they wanted to do, as long as it was, above board, that would have been no problem. But the buyer was like, well, no, we'll just, the contract says we get it, we own it. So, oh well. So I will tell you 9 times out of 10, most people aren't going to spend more money to remove something like that. Again, it was, they got upset. They weren't happy. I don't remember. It wasn't my client. It was one of my agent's clients. So I'm not sure exactly why they weren't happy. But anyway, at the end of the day, they weren't happy, and they took it out on the buyers, and they took everything out. So, but yes, that is something that you could do, is put it on the closing disclosure that they're going to pay them for whatever was left in the tank. But as you can see, it's not necessary, because whatever's left in there becomes the buyer's property anyway. Great question. FERPTA, withholding. So here's what I would tell you about FERPTA. A lot of times, unfortunately, agents on the listing do not put, they don't have the sheet that spells out everything, and the FERPTA is one of those things. So if you're not sure, I'd call the agent, hey, or text them, if they don't, especially when they don't answer phone. Maybe there's 17 offers coming through. Ask the question, right? Are your people foreign-born people? I need to put it on here. Don't assume and send it across. And I'm a believer, I don't want to send it blank, because now that's a back and forth we have to do whenever we're ratifying a contract. So if I can ask up front, and a foreign person is defined by the Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act, we call FERPTA. If a seller is a foreign person, the buyer may, now this is what's important, the buyer may be required to withhold and pay to the IRS up to 15% of the sales price on behalf of the seller, and file an IRS form which includes both seller and buyer tax identification numbers. The parties agree to cooperate with each other and the settlement agent to effectuate the legal requirements. If the seller's proceeds are not sufficient to cover the withholding obligations under FERPTA, seller may be required to pay at settlement such additional certified funds necessary for the purpose of making such withholding payment. And the reason that's important is because the government's gonna get their money, right? I mean, that's basically what this says. So you need to make sure your buyer is aware that if they are purchasing from a seller who is foreign born, nothing wrong with that. Hopefully there's sufficient, monies. Basically what the government is saying, look, these people could disappear and we have no way to get their money, right? If they go off they go overseas, they go out of the country, we have no way to get that. So then the buyer is on the hook for that money. I haven't really seen a lot of problems with that. What I heard recently, though, I did talk to an agent that works with a lot of foreign investors, is that some of these, they hold the money right up to 15%, and the government had been taking anywhere from 1 to 2 years to get that money back. So, make sure if you are working with foreign and, a seller who is foreign born and is subject to this, that you ask the questions. If you're not sure, call NVH, right, to find out, get whatever information that you need, and just let them know, look, if they hold any money, that it may take a year or so. It may not take that long, but I'm gonna just give them the expectation that part of their money is going to be held up. And a lot of foreign investors, especially, a lot of them put down a lot of cash. So, they may have some cash tied up for a while. But again, usually just make sure, communicate. And if you're unsure and you've never dealt with that, call MBH, call Janetta, call me, Hope, whatever. We'll help you walk through all of that. Smoke detectors. The seller will deliver property with smoke detectors installed and functioning in accordance with the laws and regulations of Virginia. That one's a pretty easy one. So what I would do is, if I'm going on a listing presentation and I'm walking through the house, I know it's hard because depending on when it was built and whatever the rules and regulations at the time were, some require it in every room, right? Most buildings now, if they're newer, require a smoke detector in every room. Others, it's just one on each floor. So as you're going through, at least, if you're not sure, I'm not asking you to look up the rules and regulations, but if you don't see any smoke detectors in the house, then you need to let them know that they need to have some sort of smoke detectors, right, installed and functioning. A lot of people don't do the old, in the spring and fall, right, when you spring forward and fall back, that's usually when they tell you to, turn your water off and on, for the house. And they also tell you to change your batteries on the smoke detector and carbon monoxide detector. So make sure that if you see a smoke detector, that you're asking whether or not they work. And if they don't know, then make sure you check them before it goes on the market. Here's the thing that I'm going to tell you. Don't wait for a home inspection to make sure things like that are working, because what happens is then the contract, when they're negotiating home inspection items, down at the bottom it says that they're using a professional to install blah blah blah. That you don't need a professional to put a smoke detector in unless it's hardwired. But if you have a house where there's no smoke detectors, go spend $15 per, get 3 smoke detectors and put it in the house, right? So or have them do it. Just make sure you're doing those things up front, because once you have a home inspection, now people are questioning everything, and now it's costs more money than if you just did it on the front end. Um, Call MBH if you're not sure. Yep, absolutely. Um, Great. Hey, thanks for jumping on. So,
I think
all
it's
right.
important because I had a seller that I had, we sold several, we bought some too. And then this last one, they said, we don't think that they are FERPTA. And they went to talk to them again and they found out that they're fine, but they had to go in and do whatever. There's other ways of verifying that MBH can do. So I was surprised because MBH had actually done the sale before. I think it was like 4 or 5 times I worked with them. And then it came
Okay.
up and they had to go into the office and they got it all taken care of.
Yeah, I had great point. I appreciate it, Jane. I also had one. It was so funny because they were, I don't know. I mean, I didn't even think about it, but as I'm going through the listing agreement and I'm asking the question, they're like, "Well, yeah, we're Canadian." I'm like, okay." So, and they didn't think they would have to be part of it because they had, they had all of their information, documentation. They had been in the country for years, all of those things. But I still, as Jane did, I contacted NBH and I said, "All right, let's, and NBH asked a series of questions, and based on those answers, we're able to determine that they did not have to, we didn't have to worry about FERPTA. So it's as easy as that. So that's why, great point, Jane. Just call MBH, get them to, check the boxes. And then if they have any questions, they can do further digging. That's not something that you should need to worry about. But other than just asking the question to make sure, because it is a big deal. You certainly, especially don't want your buyer to be on the hook because the government's getting their money, right? So make sure you ask the questions. So appreciate your input, Jane.
Gary, if I may interject, I think it's important to say that it's not about being foreign born, because there's a ton of foreign born people who are actually US taxpayers. I believe most of the time that's the case. It's
Correct.
people who are not US taxpayers. That's the difference. You can be born in India or in France, as I was, or anywhere else, and be a US taxpayer. You're not subject to FERPTA. But if you are a non-US resident, then FERPTA, the IRS requests the payment to them.
Great point. I appreciate that. Yes. And that was the same thing with my Canadian buddies. They were foreign born, but they were paying taxes. They were all the things that the government requires. So they did not have to pay that. So great point. Appreciate that. All right. Target lead-based paint housing represents that the dwelling at the property were or were not constructed before. Before 1978. So those, for some of you, you're like, well, it was built in 78. This says before. So I go by the contract. Just make sure you check with Janetta. I would ask her, but she had to jump on a meeting call. But if you are unsure and it was built in 78 and you want to do it, that's fine. We all know that there's certain companies, Long and Foster and some others, that required on everything. You don't need it unless it was built before 1978. If they were constructed before 1978, then unless exempt under 42 USC 4852D, property is considered target housing under the statute, and a copy of the sale disclosure and acknowledgement of information and lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards has been attached and made part of the contract as required by law. Don't just read over that, please make sure you give them the pamphlet. It's not a big deal, you know. Buyer does or does not waive the right to a risk assessment or inspection of the property for the presence of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards. If not, a copy of the sales contract addendum for lead-based paint testing is attached to establish conditions for lead-based paint risk assessment or inspection. So just make sure that you have the form that says they do or do not have information, and then that your buyers just you give your buyers the opportunity. Now, here's what I told people. Look, if it was built before 78, I would assume there's lead somewhere in the house. I did have some buyers. They had a young dog, a puppy, and they also had a baby, and they were afraid, you know, of the walls and everything else and the baseboards. And so they did this was in Alexandria. They did an actual test. You know, they did the little, you know, wand test around or whatever they do. And they determined that it was on one wall and a threshold, and that was it. So now keep in mind that as we move forward, and then they went to sell their home, now they have knowledge of lead in the house. And so you make sure you disclose that. So if your people did any testing at all or have any information, they have to provide it. If not, then you just say we don't have anything, and then it's up to your buyers. Don't ever and here's what I'd say about this and like radon and those types of things. Don't ever say, oh, you know, we usually don't find, you know, radon, or we don't usually find lead, or these houses were built, you know, and they're probably been painted over. Like, don't convince people of stuff. Just let them make a decision, give them the pamphlet, let them decide, tell them how much it costs, you know, a lead-based paint test, 150, 200 bucks, whatever it is. And then the question is, if you find it, are you going to want it, you know, remediated? And if so, that's costly, right? Do you believe that, you know, so just all of those things, just go through, share what you know. You're not an expert in lead. And then you can certainly, if you have, like, I have a home inspector that does lead testing as well. You know, look, if you have any questions, call, here's a guy, or here's a company that you can call, get more information. Here's your pamphlet. Again, your some of the things that we see, and I'm on professional standards, you know, where we sit and listen to people complain about other agents or other people. A lot of what we see, a lot of it is communication or what was said or inferred by a conversation that was had. And now most of you are texting a lot, and so there are more, as I tell folks, be careful what you put in writing, right? You know, don't ever put anything in writing that if all of a sudden it came up, you would be embarrassed that you're like, oh gosh, I really did say that. So just be careful on what you write. Wood destroying insects. Now this used to be termite, but now it's wood destroying insects, which includes carpenter bees and all of that. So this none, buyers at buyer's expense or seller at seller's expense. I think Ryan had a great point last week, and this is something that I did as well. I had a gentleman, Joel Nowak. I'll never forget him because I haven't used him forever, but I know Joel the Bug Man. He was Joel the Bug Man. I don't know if anybody else uses him. All he does is testing. And what I liked is that it wasn't, and I'm not saying companies do this, but it wasn't a company going in and saying, "Oh, we found stuff you should remedy. You know, we found tubes, and so you need, to spend $800." So, like for Joel, there was no incentive for him to do an inspection and say yes there are or no there aren't termites, because there wasn't a financial reward at the end. I don't want to say a reward, but if he found stuff, he wasn't going to make $800 now because he found something. So I'm not saying do that, but I would say as the buyer, go in, don't count on the fact that they have their own termite inspector. The termite inspection is between, I don't know, 35 and 60 bucks. It's not going to make or break a buyer. So I usually encourage my buyers to do it, whether we were in a seller's market or not, because I wanted them to have their own person going in and checking whether or not there really were termites. So what will they do? So who's paying for it? You can certainly determine that. They will furnish a written report from a licensed pest control firm dated not more than 90 days prior to settlement, showing that all dwellings and or garages within property, excluding fences or shrubs not abutting to the garage or dwellings, are free of visible evidence of live wood destroying insects and free from visible damage. Seller will provide buyer and broker and any representatives of the licensed pest control firm selected by the appropriate party above reasonable access to the property to perform wood destroying insect inspections. Any treatment for live wood destroying insects and or repairs for any damage identified in the WDI report will be made at seller's expense, and seller will provide, written evidence of such treatment and or repair prior to the date of settlement, which will satisfy the requirements of this paragraph. Unless the parties agree otherwise in writing, all treatment and or repairs to be performed by a contractor licensed to do that type of work required. So that's a whole lot, but basically saying if anything's found, that there's going to be treatment, right? That they'll treat for it. And I will say, be careful on the excluding fences and shrubs if you have a VA. For anybody who's come across that, I had a gentleman that was a VA buyer, and they found termites, and it wasn't next to the house. It was a tree on the fence line that had termites, and it was required that they get rid of those termites. So most will not, if you have a conventional loan, they won't do that. It's usually just the house and that's it. But I did have a situation on VA where it was in the yard, right? And they wanted it treated. So just keep that in mind. And then if there's any repairs that need to be done, fortunately, most people, I think, in this area keep up with their termite treatment, and we're not. I had some, again, being from Louisiana. And I have people who've moved from the South, and it is a really big deal down there. So it is a big deal here, but we don't have the same type of damage and problems that we do that other parts of the country do. So just keep that in mind, and keep that in mind when you're thinking about who's paying for it. It's not a make or break on the contract. I won't kill your buyers to get somebody else to do it, because a lot of times if a seller has a pest control company that comes out, that pest control company, of course, is not going to say, oh yeah, these people have been paying for treatment and we found termites. So I'm always of the opinion you get the buyer to pay for it and do it, but do however you want. Would a condo association be responsible for repair if the interior is responsibility of the association? So when it comes to condo associations, if you do happen to have an inspection done, and I've had this happen where this was years ago now, when lenders, if it was 4 floors or less, required one. They're kind of iffy now on whether or not they do, but we did have one, and they found termites, and so what the sellers weren't responsible in that case. It was the association, and we let the association know. The association wrote a letter, I believe, saying, yes, we are aware. Thank you for letting us be aware. We will have someone come out. And so it wasn't the individual seller that had to do it. It was actually the association that took care of the termites in that case. Yeah, so have one this week. Yeah, on the condo. Yeah. So unless it is in your unit specifically, which is probably not the case, it's probably within maybe your unit and other units, then you'd have to coordinate with your association to get all that handled. As long as you got something from the association saying it was being done or taken care of or whatever, then usually most lenders are fine with it. And it's nothing your buyer can do other than say, okay, we'll move on, but great question. Home warranty, yes or no? Home warranty selected by the buyer or seller is paid for and provided at settlement by the buyer or seller. Cost not to exceed X. Warranty provider to be Y, right? I think Ryan had a great point last week. Just because the seller is saying they're providing one doesn't mean it's going to cover everything, right? Remember, it's usually the main systems of the house. It is not like the pool. It doesn't cover roofing. So if you have a buyer who's very concerned about what a home warranty covers, figure out if the seller says, oh yeah, we're going to transfer one. And I only say this because, again, on a professional standards situation, we had one where a home warranty was being transferred, right? And then the question was, did the buyer and the agent just assume it was covering everything? Well, it was the cheapest warranty, which doesn't always cover, certain systems in the home, or maybe it covers one air conditioning system, but not two if it's a dual or whatever. So make sure you ask ahead of time and figure out what's being provided. And maybe at settlement, maybe the seller doesn't pay for an additional coverage, but maybe your buyer does, says, hey, well, we want the pool and we want the this and the that and the other covered. We'll pay the difference. So just let them know. Make sure you're aware of it. Here's the other thing. Just because you put it in your listing agreement, just because you put it in Bright MLS and say that the seller is transferring a warranty or a home warranty is provided, if you don't put it in the contract, it doesn't exist. That's just like saying the sellers will credit $5,000 toward the floors. Putting it in bright is not the contract. Remember, it has to be in your contract. Because I've seen this many a times where it says in Bright MLS, seller to provide a home warranty, and it's not in the contract. So when you come to me as a broker, you go to Jeanette as a broker and you say, hey, these people were supposed to provide a home warranty, and it's not in there, and we didn't put it in the contract. Guess who's on the hook? You are, as the agent, right? So please make sure you are putting all those things. Should we recommend a home warranty or let them choose one? No, look, it's like recommending a home inspector or a termite person, right? I mean, if you have someone that you've worked with and you like using, I'd recommend them, but I'd say, look, check it out. Here's 3 or 4 different ones. Here's the one that I like and use. And I like them because I know the rep there. And so whenever I have a problem, I can call, Jane, the rep, and I can make sure that everything is good to go if you ever have any problems. So you could certainly recommend one, but I'd give them several different options. But the key to remember is that if it's not in the contract, then but your buyer was expecting it. Well, you're going to have to make your buyer whole, right? You're not going to let them do, oh, sorry, well, I forgot to put it in the contract. Again, $600, $700, $800, chipping away at your commission. So make sure that you put all of these things in there and who's paying for it and the type of warranty they want. Make sure they look at it. Don't, because I think a lot of times we just kind of blow this one off. We're like, oh, it's a home warranty, whatever. But they're all different. They're how much you pay. $100 for the deductible or $200. Those are all different. And this one covers all of these things, but not these things. So make sure your people are looking through that and you go through what's being conveyed or what they would like and put that in there as part of the negotiation. We're almost out of time. I can't believe it. I've been talking too much. Damage or loss, the risk of damage or loss to the property by fire, act of God, or other casualty remains with the seller until settlement. I think most of you understand that. All right. Well, we'll start on title next time. And I promise you, this is probably the biggest one, obviously going through the contract. I hope you all appreciate it. I'm not, belaboring the contract. It's just there's so many little nuances to the contract that if you again know how to work it, know how to use it, then you're the smarter agent and you can get your clients in and out of situations or make sure that you get stuff. And I'm not saying to manipulate it, but I'm saying if you use the contract as it is presented and you fill it out properly, then number one, that protects you, right? More than anything else. And a lot of times that can be the difference between, your people being able to get out of a contract if something happens or not getting out or you covering yourself or whatever the case may be. So, and I like to share the stories because you can't make this stuff up, right? You really can't. Some of these things like to this day, I will never forget that the lady draining the fuel tank. But anyway, all right. Any other questions before? So we'll start on paragraph 19 with title, and we probably should be able to finish up because a lot of the rest of the stuff is just kind of boilerplate stuff next week, and then move on to like conventional financing and all of those things. And we'll go through some of those, probably not all the forms. I'll probably hit on the differences between the conventional and FHA and VA, just some things to be aware of. Anybody have any other questions? I appreciate you all throwing in some questions and scenarios and jumping on Jane and everybody, giving us some feedback. Any other stuff before we jump off? All right. Well, you're welcome. Well, thank you all. I hope you all have a wonderful Thursday. Good luck out there and have a great productive weekend.
Thanks,
you.
Derek.